You ever had a Slim Jim?
What do you think?
I think it's time. Come on. This is what road trips are all about.
No.
Go on, have a bite of the gym. Bite the gym. Nibble on the gym. Bite of the James? Isn't that what they say in your country? Little bite of the James, shall we? Yum, 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 yum. Yum, 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 yum. Little bite of James? Good.
Never do it, Slim Jim.
Welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast where psychology meets film. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about caregiving. Today's film is The Fundamentals of Caring, a 2016 Netflix direct film. So, wow, we're coming up on 8 years since that movie came out. The movie was written and directed by Rob Burnett, and the film is based on the book, The Revised Fundamentals of Caring, which is a massive name, and so they just shortened it a little bit to Fundamentals of Caring because there's a lot of different kinds of caring in this movie that we'll talk about between the two main characters and, of course, some of the side characters that we meet along the way. The film stars Paul Rudd as a poorly named character. I gotta say, I know people like this exist in real life, and this is not a commentary on them, but his character's name is Benjamin. So I'm assuming he is Benjamin. Oh boy. I know this is a fictional character, but oh my God. Can we maybe be a little bit more original with naming? That's all I'm saying. That's all I am saying. Anyways, Paul Rudd's character, of course, is Paul Rudd. There's really it's kind of no line between Paul Rudd and Benjamin. I would say still kind of jokey, still kind of goofy, irreverent, that kind of thing. So Paul Rudd, basically. Craig Roberts plays the second lead. He is a younger man. I think he's like in his late teens, somewhere around there. An adult, I believe, not an actual child, not like a teenager, minor, or anything like that in the film. He has muscular dystrophy, mentioned multiple times as Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So I'm assuming that this is a rarer form of muscular dystrophy. His character's name is Trevor. His mother is played by Jennifer Eel. Her name is Elsa. We'll talk a lot about her in this episode because a lot of Trevor's early characterizations are a product, I believe, of Jennifer Eel's mother character. Selena Gomez is in the movie. She plays Dot. Her full name is later revealed as Dorothy. Dot, she's a hitchhiker that Ben and Trevor pick up on their road trip. And then, well, let's see. We've got a character named Peaches, played by Megan Ferguson. And then Bobby Cannavale, who had previously appeared in Ant-Man the previous year in 2015 with Paul Rudd, plays Dot's dad. We meet him toward the end of the movie. Turns out he has been tailing Dot while she's been hitchhiking to make sure that she ends up in the right place. So, and then a few other bit actors here and there. Julia Denton plays Janet, who is Ben Benjamin's soon-to-be ex-wife, and we'll get into why that's soon-to-be. In the movie, they are married until events at the end of the movie. So the movie itself, like I said, Craig Roberts plays Trevor. Trevor has muscular dystrophy, so he is wheelchair bound, and Paul Rudd plays his caregiver, his full-time caregiver, while Jennifer Eel's character, his mother, works every day at a bank, during the day at a bank. And so Trevor needs care around the clock, has a routine. We'll talk about the routine and everything. And so we in this episode, we're going to talk about disability perception from both the non-disabled side and the disabled side, and then, of course, the relationships and the trauma that is part of the characterization of Paul Rudd's character. So we're going to get into all of that. Please stay tuned. We've got a great guest host to talk about the disability perspective, so stick around. We'll be jumping right into that. My guest host today is Dr. Crissa Draper. Crissa is an assistant professor at Utah State University and the co-director of the psychology department undergraduate program. She co-runs a distance undergraduate research lab and has since 2018, well before COVID, which is quite interesting. While the research she does varies in content from the science of teaching and learning, SOTL for the folks that are in the know, to implicit biases and all sorts of things in between, she also does regular talks and trainings related to disabilities and chronic health conditions, both teaching evidence-based treatments and coping from the lens of experience and exploring microaggressions related to these issues. Welcome to the show, Crissa.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
How has your spring 2024 semester gotten off to the start?
You know, so far so good. It's been a whirlwind the past few years for me, as I think it has for just about everybody else.
Yeah.
But, I'm ready to get going again.
Well, I'm happy to have you on, and good luck to a good spring 2024 semester. So before we jump into today's film, The Fundamentals of Caring, I wanted to get your sense, like I do with all of my guests, because I like to blend, of course, teaching and film. I'd like to get your sense on film in general, like what do you think about movies, and then mixing movies into your teaching.
So I am just obsessed with films. That is probably my primary hobby.
Awesome.
And I'm in Utah, which is like one of the main things I was excited about when moving here was like, wait, do I get to go to Sundance? Which I had managed to do every year for several years. Even through COVID, I got to do like the online viewings and stuff, which obviously I could have done from anywhere, but I didn't know that because it's living in Utah that helps. So yeah, I get very excited about films from art house to just everything else. I love using films in my teaching. I often kind of have it more often when I'm doing in person, where I can use clips and things throughout. And I haven't been doing as much in person lately. So it's a lot more film recommendations, because I don't think students end up watching the film to the same degree or engaging in the discussions quite as much as I would like. But I do love it. I just think that that's where you get the stories of real life and emotionality around things that we're trying to teach. And I just absolutely think they're great tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're one of the first people to mention the stories and emotionality. Could you expand on the emotionality part a little bit more? This is for the book that I'm writing, of course.
Yeah, I think that to me, the reason that we like films is because it helps us to experience emotions in a safe environment.
Okay.
And I think, we get the same thing, I think, out of novels or stories in all forms, whether it's our friend's story or, a family story. But I think that we have this narrative that is so well pruned for evoking emotions that it's really like this safe practicing space for emotions that helps us to understand not just our own experience, but the experience of people. And I love that about movies.
That's so great because, it's the human, I guess, proclivity, we'll say, to telling stories way back in our, our ancestral history of telling oral stories and then learning how to write and then putting those down in writing and then figuring out films and pictures and things like that and putting them on the screen to use visuals. It takes you back all the way to, cave paintings and all of that and being able to share experiences and being able to find whether I know on the show we talk a lot about fictional Hollywood films, of course, and so we're not necessarily talking about real, at least in real life, people, sometimes based on true stories, but we still kind of feel that because they are people presenting it to us. Animation still works, even though they're not real people, right? Because they're anthropomorphized and things like that. So,
absolutely.
Stories just makes it. And I think stories, as you're saying, is a great vector, an avenue to talk about psychology.
Absolutely.
Since psychology is about humans, of course.
Right.
So, it's the best of all worlds, in my opinion. And I think that's a refrain that you might agree with. And many guests have mentioned in the past on the show. And it's just so fun. It's so fun doing this podcast as I'm, this is the fifth calendar year that I'm doing this show. This is the 75th episode. And just to see people share those sentiments, it's so lovely.
That's so exciting. Congratulations on your long-running podcast, too. That's fun.
I appreciate that. So the sentimentality aside, let's jump into our film discussion for today, which is the fundamentals of caring. So we met at ACT, the Society for the Teaching of Psychology annual conference on teaching back in October in Portland. We went and had dinner at one of their famous restaurants, and you got one of their Flamin' Moe's or whatever. I forgot what it was called.
The Spanish coffee. Yeah.
There you go, Spanish coffee.
Yep.
And how was the Spanish coffee?
Oh, it was a delight. Dinner and a show. In so many ways. Yeah,
that was very fun that they make the Spanish coffee in front of the table. That was great. So we were talking about you joining the podcast then, and then we had some email correspondence after that. And you're a big horror fan, right?
I am. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm a less of a horror fan, as I've mentioned on the show very frequently. So I asked for some other suggestions, and you had suggested Fundamentals of Caring. And this is a Netflix production. It'll always be on Netflix. So if you're a Netflix subscriber, you can always catch this. It's not too long. It's just over an hour and a half. So very tight film. Definitely recommend watching this if you want some sad cries, some happy cries, some feel goods, that kind of thing. It's a really good story, Fundamentals of Caring. And in the beginning of the movie, the main character goes to a 6-week course to learn and to be a certified caregiver with a company that employs full-time in-house caregivers. So, Chris, I wanted to ask you what brought this particular choice up in our discussions, and once we settled on it, what could you tell us about broadly your thoughts on the film?
Yeah, so I think that this film in particular is so great at teaching all of these lessons that are just cornerstones in psychology teaching. So I think it's great at teaching issues related to DEI generally, and more specifically to a group that is just so often forgotten in discussions of DEI, which is people with disabilities and chronic health conditions. And that's a group that I happen to be a part of, which is kind of why I noticed that we're missing.
Yeah.
So, the two kind of main messages that I think are apparent through this film that are so useful is first that like any diverse group is made up of individuals and is not a monolith. And that's true of all sorts of DEI discussions, but it's this people first discussion, that I think is really highlighted in the film of one character saying, I could be a jerk with or without the wheelchair or something similar to that. And I think that's just so telling of like, there's people in here, not just disableds in here.
Right.
And the other theme that I think is so great in this movie is really kind of aligning with this idea of cultural humility and understanding that the way to give care, lining up with fundamentals of caring as a position, is to watch and listen and to learn about this person through actual kind of empathy instead of decisions from books or pre-existing ideas. And that's so important in this one because it's not the character that most people expect to see or want to see in a wheelchair. And I really like that about it.
Yeah.
So I think it's this phenomenal movie at showing a few sides of the experience of disability. Perhaps most importantly, it just gives representation to a group that really isn't represented that much. And I feel like this movie is kind of like almost like the Will and Grace was to representation in LGBTQIA circles.
Okay.
Where it's like, it's like an intro, right? Yeah. It's like an introductory level of like, hey, we're just starting somewhere. So now we're going to make it all about this instead of saying, hey, there's just a person in a wheelchair having a life and we're thinking of emotions about something else. But for now, it's great because it's all about like what it means to be in this relationship with somebody with a disability and to give care in that way. And I love that.
Yeah. And I want to jump on some of the points that you mentioned there. So there are fictional Hollywood films out there that feature characters in wheelchairs that feature disabled characters, again, out of wheelchairs and with other disabilities, like Elephant Man, for example, right? If you want to talk about classic horror or something like that. Yeah. But this film in particular fits with the show Cinema Psych Podcast because of the message, the themes. Not just that there is a disabled character in the movie, but we specifically focus on how disabled characters navigate life, especially navigate an able-bodied life, right? So we are a abled-centric society, and so the margins are where you find disabled folks, especially those with physical disabilities, folks in wheelchairs, which prompted not even until like really, what was it, the 1990s when the Americans with Disabilities Act was
1990 exactly.
Yeah, 1990. So right, you're talking about relatively recent history where these issues, especially physically disabled issues, are brought to the fore, right? Having ramps, elevators, these things like that to allow people from the margins to actually participate fully in society. And so what I want to jump off from there before we get into the specific features of the main character, Trevor, who is wheelchair bound. You mentioned that you were a member of the disability community. Would you like to share with the audience what your experience is and how you have managed that in your life?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was in my third year of my Ph.D. program when I was hit by and dragged under a pickup truck.
Oh my goodness.
Which I don't recommend. If ever you have the occasion to try that out, don't do it.
Oh, good.
But it was, I broke my left side, basically.
Okay.
And then everything healed except my foot didn't. And then it got worse. Okay. And so after about 6 months, I was diagnosed with it's an autoimmune disorder. It's honestly the most fascinating disorder, I think. It's an autoimmune disorder of the nerves.
Okay.
So it's basically my brain telling me on repeat that my foot is like freshly broken. And so it sends
Wow.
all the resources as though it's broken. So it's like changes in bone structure, changes in skin, changes in sweating, all these things that I didn't even like know the body's cared about for healing, right? And then of course, the main symptom is it's sending the pain that says keep this area safe because it's freshly broken. So it's actually, in a lot of ways, it is seen as the most painful chronic pain condition. If you ask ChatGPT what's the most painful, it'll say, well, we can't say specifically, but also the RPS. So it's, and there's kind of a few articles that are kind of what ChatGPT is going off of that for. So it's a very, very painful condition. And because of that, I can walk. And, you know, becoming part of this community, I've learned so many different things that I think are so interesting. One of which is like most of us can walk that use wheelchairs. Usually the statistic is around 70% or more of people in wheelchairs can get up and move around, walk around. So even though I used to just stand up and say, it's a miracle. Over time,
especially
it's like,
to a new group of people. Oh my God.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but it turns out that's normal. Like we're all, not we're all, but the vast majority of us have this range of things. And for me, it really just helps to make my life a lot bigger to use adaptive equipment. So if I wanted to be stubborn and not use a wheelchair or not use a cane, I could live my life, but it would mostly be from home because I would wear myself out too quickly in pain and then just kind of. So that's my relationship to kind of where it started. And what I do now, with another kind of interesting tidbit that I'll add about that story being, it is so interesting to overnight become a part of a community.
Sure.
And have that relationship with microaggressions, right? Because microaggressions don't matter until they're repeated too much. And so to come from the majority where I was the microaggressor to the minority and see, it took like 5 to 7 years for these to build up and become like, oh, wait, I get it. I don't like that anymore.
Yeah, I hear you.
So it's so interesting. I love that part of it too. It's just what an interesting view. But anyway, so that's my my story with how I relate to all this stuff.
I want to share a personal story with you and the listeners, of course. It's not something that I really share a lot because I don't know where I fit in all of this. So I had, well, I should say I have a congenital defect in my left ankle. Considering that you just said your left foot, I was very, very taken with you suggesting it was or telling me that it was your left foot. My left ankle got the wrong set of instructions in my genes when I was developing, and it's called a subtalar coalition. It just means that my ankle bones did not develop correctly, and they started fusing together. So when I was 12, I got surgery to quote unquote correct this disorder. Basically, the orthopedic surgeon cut out a piece of my bone and then took some fatty tissue from my Achilles area and shoved it in between those two bones. And they're like, yep, he's 12. He's not going to have any more problems with this. Fast forward to, and the reason why I ended up getting surgery is because my ankle would lock up, especially sitting cross-legged. We had to sit cross-legged when we lined up for, so middle school, when we lined up for PE. Before we went and did any kind of sports or running or anything like that, we had to sit cross-legged on the ground. And so I would get up and I would not be able to move until my ankle kind of warmed up, I guess, and then I would able to do it. But then after, like, we had to do our, our mile runs. I'm sure you remember school PE. After we played sports or we did runs, I would tell my mom that like it would be tough to walk afterward. So ended up getting, x-rays and going through the whole thing. Fast forward to my recovery and having to do ankle exercises to get my ankle. I do not have full range of motion. I never did have full range of motion. Yeah, I was probably a bit of a dumb teenager and not adhering to my physical therapy regimen. I did not see a physical therapist. I had to do these at home. So it was basically my responsibility to do my own physical therapy exercises. And, I ultimately, it's hard to say whether or not it was my fault or, just my body's fault. But fast forward to when I was 18 or whatever, I went back to that same orthopedic group and I was like, listen, it hurts every time I walk for an extended period of time. And they were like, okay, here, wear some orthotics. Orthotics didn't really help.
Yeah.
Fast forward to grad school, I had really good insurance. So I'm like, I should probably get this checked out. And so I got x-rays and they're like, well, the fatty tissue isn't really there anymore.
Yeah.
And really physical therapy is the only thing that is gonna help you. So I went and did some physical therapy and they told me how to, do these exercises, hip exercises, ankle exercises, all sorts of exercises to strengthen from the hip, basically the hip all the way down to relieve pressure on my ankle. And none of it really helped. The only thing that I would tell you that really feels good is when the opposite side tendons are hit with ultrasound. An ultrasound thing, because it like releases the tension in them.
Yeah.
It's really strange, but it's the only thing that feels good. And I am concerned. I don't have a prognosis. I am concerned that eventually it's going to be a cane if I'm walking, but I don't want to say it may be a wheelchair because I think that's a little possibly too far out to the future. So psychologically, because I can walk, does hurt sometimes. Like if I were to get up right now, it's going to be stiff and it's going to be painful to walk until I like really flex it out.
Sure.
But because I can walk, but have this, what I would call an invisible issue, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't know it unless you saw me limping. And a limp could be any reason. You'd be limping for any reason. Oh, he sprained his ankle. Well, that's going to heal eventually, right? So one of the things that I've been struggling with my identity has been, where do I consider myself?
Yeah.
Do I consider myself part of the disabled community? Does that take away as part of all of the other major identity groups, right? I'm white, I'm a man, I'm straight, and I come from relative privilege, and I have a position of privilege as a college professor. Where do I sit in that? So that's something that I've been. I'm not asking you to place me there. I'm just sharing that. I think if you don't have at least from my perspective, if you don't have a visible disability, right? You're not in a wheelchair. You're not walking with a cane. You don't have a handicap placard in your car or on your license plate or whatever. Where does one fit in that identity space? And that's something that I've been grappling with for the better part of a decade.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can. I would like to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah.
As someone who said just a few minutes ago, it's wild how you go one day not being a member of the disabled community and one day being a member of, or considering yourself a member of the disabled community. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Again, I'm not asking for like you should do this or you should do that, but I am curious.
Yeah, you might not be asking for it, but you're going to get it because here's the thing. I think that is the most common experience. Mm-hmm. So like I go to movies to understand the human condition and I go to research, but I also go to stand-up comedy. Like I think stand-up comedy is this great source of like the only way that it hits is if it's relatable.
Yeah.
So you can understand so much more just by what they're saying. You're like, there's a whole like set of individuals who get this. And there are 3 or 4 disabled comedians that I follow, all of whom have said what you just said.
Yeah.
I have said what you just said.
Okay.
I've seen people in shows about disability say what you just said. Mm-hmm. And so I've come to have this theory about like disability identity that needs to be studied. So if anybody's looking for a research idea, I got one for you. I think that where we fit in this is really very similar to like the mixed race issue where people kind of don't know where they fit, because it's really a very small minority of people with disabilities who are the ones that we think of and say, well, I don't want to take away from their rights. I don't want to take away from their identity. But I think it's kind of like the word disability is really doing an injustice to everyone, I agree. Because it's too big. It's a problem in language. And so I think people with disabilities is almost like, I think it's bigger, but most similar to like the concept of like BIPOC, where it's not as though somebody who is Black is having a similar situation in the United States as somebody who is Asian. But they're kind of both covered by this overall thing, let alone somebody who's mixed race on, half white and half any of those things. So I think it's like, it all counts in this way of like, does it affect your ability to interact with the world the way that other people do? And I think that the vast majority of people with disabilities would kind of have this shyness or shudder about like, well, I don't really count.
Yeah. I wonder if there is a shame associated with it. I've considered that being an emotion that is possible for my experience, right? Being ashamed that I am disabled, and this is me being absolutely raw here. So I apologize to anyone listening if you take my use of shame in the wrong way. I'm speaking only for myself.
Yeah.
So, right. So is it a bad thing to be a disabled person, right? Or does it, or on the same side of the token, does it offer me a special kind of victimhood or something like that, right? And that's an elegant way of saying there's an inherent injustice somewhere in there.
Right.
So that's all that again, like I said, I've been grappling with this identity crisis, so to speak, for the better part of a decade, I would say.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and I think one other thing that I think is so interesting is like I think there's a lot of emotions that can go with that. And so that progression from when I was 26 years old, kind of gaining this lifelong disability or this lifelong chronic illness that I didn't really identify as a disability right away.
Right.
Is like, I think there was a lot of shame. I think there was a lot of like grief, a lot. It's just so many emotional, like all the big emotions, so much fear, so much everything. And I think it's really just a bizarre thing that as I've aged into this just being kind of a comfortable background part of who I am, it's not all that interesting in a lot of ways. It's the only ways I think all that interesting is because it's rare and not a lot of people that I know can share that experience. Other than that, nobody cares. And so I start to see these things that used to be there and I don't understand them anymore, including I only in the last probably 2 years started to become aware of this idea that there is a Disability Pride Month, the month of July. And so the idea that once you get kind of habituated to this identity and what it means and who you are, it's not something that's just like a loss. It's something that gives too. And even though I'm in pain all the time and, that's not great, what it has done for me to develop my other parts of my identity are I wouldn't have been able to do. Like people with disabilities on the whole are the most exceptional problem solvers, and it's come out of necessity. But man, is it cool. Like I got you beat, guarantee. You know what I mean? It's like this cool thing that I will take that. I like it. I like that about me. And this adaptability, because it's kind of like, you're put into the flames, figure it out or burn. And so you figure it out. And now there's this resilience that I get to have that other people don't have access to. And so there's all these proud points that I think I would, even when I had a disability early, I would not have understood or seen in my future. I would have been like, that's a lot of people with a lot of dissonance. It's like, no, this is for reals. You know?
I appreciate you giving me another side of that, because I have not incorporated that into my identity as much as you say that you have. So perhaps that is a point or source for growth as I continue to live, right? And live with this.
Medications are also on a precise schedule. It's all in this notebook. Prescription meds, deflazacort, losartan, eplerenone, Those you absolutely can't miss. Then the supplements: protandem, halin, omega fatty acids, calcium, vitamin D, CoQ10, creatine, glutamine, quercetin, multivitamin, and mega green tea. Why don't you read the notebook and we'll talk more thoroughly later. Statistically, Trevor probably has another 7 to 10 years. So let's do everything right, okay?
What I want to do is obviously pivot back to the movie, but your last point here, right? So let's talk about Trevor. Trevor is the character in the movie, and he has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a rare form of muscular dystrophy, and it does end lives a little bit earlier than other forms of muscular dystrophy. And if you're not familiar with muscular dystrophy, this is a degenerative disorder that affects muscle control and muscle movement. And so people with muscular dystrophy end up being wheelchair bound and require massive amounts of assistance as they get older and the disorder gets worse and worse, right? So it's degenerative, it's progressive. So as somebody gets older, it gets worse. And so Trevor, I don't remember what they said his age was at the start of the movie when Ben first meets him, but he turns 21 at the end of the movie because that is stated in the sort of epilogue narration. So I would imagine he's like 19 or 20. Somewhere around there. And so he has been living with this for a long time. They say a number of times in the movie that he was diagnosed at age 3. And that is when his father leaves the picture, which we'll talk about in the second segment, all of the daddy issues everyone has in the movie. But I want to specifically talk, Crissa, about Trevor's experiences that we learn prior to the film setting and then during the film. So can you speak broadly about Trevor's experiences?
Sure. I think the experiences that I find useful to display on film, that I think it's kind of exciting to me that people get to experience, are a lot of kind of microaggressions.
Okay.
And there's a couple that are my favorite.
Okay.
One is
before you jump into the microaggressions in the movie, could you define what a microaggression, a micro insult,
absolutely,
micro assault, those kinds of things to the listeners?
Yeah, that's a great point. So a microaggression is something I don't usually use like the real definition.
Okay.
But I think a way to understand them well is that it is a statement or a behavior that by definition does not matter unless it's repeated too much.
Okay.
It's not offensive. It's not hurtful. Otherwise, it would be macro, right?
Sure.
So it's the repetition. It's like the dripping of a drip of water into the same spot that makes the spot sore.
Yeah.
And
a fusion animation that I've used in the past. It's like a mosquito bite, but over time it could be lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of mosquito bites, right?
Exactly. Yeah. One doesn't matter. The swarm does.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so I think that's kind of a good way to picture it. And with disability specific, it's kind of interesting because they're real kindnesses, most of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at I think it's called the ableist scale, ableist microaggression scale, has a long list of good ones if anybody's interested in looking. And almost all of them are just these super nice, kind, taking care of, it's mothering of somebody. But the problem is they don't need to be mothered. So a microaggression that is in the movie is this infantilizing idea.
Oh, yeah.
And that's so common. And it's seen throughout the movie. I think that you get shocked out of it almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes that kind of emotional story that we talked about, right? It's like people go into this story imagining, oh, the poor baby in the wheelchair. And he comes out with all of his noises that you expect of somebody in a wheelchair. And he's like not in control of his body. And then you realize that he's just being a little twit. It's like, people in wheelchairs can be little twits. Like that's breaking my bias,
right?
That's breaking my stereotype of a person in a wheelchair, is that they can be this whole human being who's also just kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that this whole movie shows he's not a nice kid throughout the movie. I think he's like age appropriately bratty.
Yeah.
But it's not like he's going to save the world. Like, don't go on thinking he's an inspiration.
Yeah, he's very misanthropic, and you're right. He's, I think, maybe a little more cynical than your average 19 or 20-year-old, but yeah, quite misanthropic, and there might be some deep-seated reasons for that, but yeah, it outwardly uses his disability as a weapon in many cases.
And I think that really starts the movie off with this idea that you have all these biases you probably weren't aware of. You probably thought were nice, like, oh, people in wheelchairs are just so precious. We need to protect them. And it's like, you do not need to protect him. Like, he is good.
Yeah.
You know? And I love that. And there's a few more throughout the movie that are excellent in similar ways, where it just constantly challenges the picture of a person in a wheelchair that you didn't know you had, I think.
Okay. What? Give us an example.
So I think another example is another common microaggression is the idea that people in wheelchairs are kind of without sexuality or lacking in ability to date. And, you know, I think we go right into him having no ability to talk to girls, having doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
But he's interested.
Right.
And it's not as a little kid looking at their teacher. Like, he is a 19 or 20-year-old who's like, I would like to have this. And that's not the picture we have of people in wheelchairs as a general rule. We think that they're supposed to be alone because, aw. Yeah.
And Paul Rudd's character Ben asks Trevor during the movie, like, and then Dot sort of has a more crass way of asking, you know, does your penis work? Right.
Yeah. Which, would you believe that's like said all the time?
Right. No, I would absolutely believe that, because humans are not shy.
Right. And why is it somebody's business? It's like, I'm not going to ask your name, but I am going to ask immediately about your genitals.
Yeah.
Like, it's the strangest. And I know that's a microaggression, not just to the disabled community, but to others as well, including, you know, trans and other individuals.
Absolutely.
But it's like, why would this be your business? What a bizarre statement. Can you imagine saying it to somebody who's just like part of the majority?
Yes. And I think to your broader point about relationships and the perceived asexuality, especially of people who are wheelchair bound and who have muscle and control based disorders, right?
Right. That
the pity extends. So it's pity, right? And this asexuality extends to the idea like a pretty girl, in this case Dot, would only go on a date because of pity, right? Not about genuine liking or anything like that. And I think the movie does a really good job of showing Trevor's struggle, right? Because he's not the most smooth guy.
Right.
But Dot's curiosity and their date in the middle of the film doesn't end with sex or anything like that. It's very wholesome. It's very genuine. It doesn't come across, and I think this is really important as far as the filmmaking is concerned, it doesn't come across as a pity move by Dot.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that I kind of expected it to. I've seen this movie before, but as I'm rewatching it in preparation, I had this like memory that it was like they didn't do a good enough job, like that it was accidentally a pity party. And as I'm rewatching it, I was like, because why would Dot want to date this guy who's just kind of a jerk? Like, he's just going around saying like crass jokes that are not respectful. And he's just like messing with people without respect for their, like the type of pranks he pulls are kind of disrespectfully rude in a way that, we kind of enjoy sometimes in movies. But I'm like, why is somebody like, what they need to give a reason to be interested in him for it to be something other than pity. And in my rewatching, I was like, oh, they did.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it before. It was like the side conversations that made him so human to her, where he would like whisper things and be like, we're creating a little inner circle here.
Yeah.
It's like you and me versus Ben in this kind of lovable way.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really important thing to add.
You're absolutely right. And the icing on the cake that took the pity part away from my viewing of it was when he was asking her out on the date, and he basically logicked her into it. Basically, It was like, she's like, I only date assholes, or I only go for assholes. And he's like, well, I am an asshole, but I'm also not an asshole, which is surreptitiously asshole-ish.
Right, because you want me to be an asshole.
Because
so
you want me to be
jerk
an
am I
asshole.
that I'm
So,
being nice?
yeah, right. And it's just like the many layers is like a asshole onion. And he like, I think he
Put that on a
like,
t-shirt.
right. Yeah. He affectionately gets his point across that he has genuine feelings for her.
Yeah.
And she recognizes that. And so at that point, to me, it doesn't reflect pity. It reflects, oh, this guy has genuine feelings for me. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah,
Whatever.
exactly.
We'll give it a
Yeah,
shot.
which I think is so like important too, to see that it's very common for people to comment on my relationships in public in this way that's also kind of just known that happens to other people, where it's like, how sweet of this person to take care of you.
Right.
And it's like, they must be so good. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm not needing a whole lot of care. Right. And if I look at the differences of like, it's not that I carry nothing, right? I need care in the same way that my partner does.
Yeah.
Like, he's got baggage too. It's not in his foot, but we've all got it.
Yeah.
And all of us need care. And some days my days are going to be hard, and it's predictable that they'll be hard in this way instead of like some other way. And so it's just this interesting idea that people see it as just like a one-way space, I think because it's rare and because it so often is associated with kind of end of life. You see these huge numbers about disability that it's 1 out of 6 people. It's like, I don't know people like me. So where is everybody?
Right.
Right. And it's because it's so end of life specific that it comes up so often. And then it is more likely to have like this care responsibility.
Yeah.
Just as it is in fundamentals of caring. But you can see he doesn't need care other than physically either. Right.
Right.
Like he's good.
Yeah.
He's got his thing going.
Peaches is already asleep. You guys want to get something to eat?
Do you guys mind maybe just going by yourselves? I'm pretty beat. I think there's a place across the street.
Come on, how obvious is this?
No, it's not. It's been a long day.
Yeah.
Are you asking me on a date?
Yes, I am.
Pick me up next door when you're ready.
Dude, you were like James Bond there. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen in my life. Come on, man, give me a little sugar. Give it up.
My people don't high five. Trust me, it's worse than the air quotes.
Come on, don't leave me hanging. Yeah, no, that was terrible. You were right.
Handsome and cool, Ben. You got it?
Right. I'm just gonna give you your medicines before you go.
What?
Nothing.
What do you mean nothing? What is it? Ben, what is it?
Nothing. Oh, shit.
What?
Shit.
Ben, what the fuck? What is it?
I think I left your medicines in the other hotel. with the CPAP machine. They were all together.
Oh, fuck. You fucking kidding me? That's not a face cream, okay? I need that shit to live.
No, I know. It's, shit, no.
Fuck.
Listen, it's fine, all right? I'm gonna call a 24-hour pharmacy, and I'm
No,
gonna...
but in Pudding, USA, they're not gonna have shit. Oh, fuck. I knew one of your spells would kill me.
No, it's not... shit. I'm sorry. Look, I'm really sorry, all right? I don't know what happened.
I know what happened. You're an idiot. You're a fucking idiot.
I'm not, all right? I'm not an idiot. I'm hilarious.
Oh, man, are you kidding me? This is when you decide to play the prank? When I'm about to go on my first date?
It seemed funnier that way.
We'll bring this up in the next segment about why Ben thinks that the thing going needs some change, of course. Yeah. But in the first part of the movie where we are building the relationship between Trevor and Ben, we do kind of see the necessity for Trevor's care because his hands don't uncurl on his own. Like, he needs help uncurling his hands. There are a couple of jokes that are made in this space at the expense, of course, after Trevor makes jokes at Ben's expense, like, don't do air quotes, you're not actually flipping me off, that kind of thing. Right. So Ben, while he's in his so Trevor, while he's in his wheelchair, can't navigate his home space while his mother is gone. So the care that Trevor needs is full-time daytime care from awake to sleep. And we see that in the form of going to the bathroom. Right. There's the great scene at the beginning of the movie where the only question Trevor has for this new caregiver is, how are you going to wipe my ass? I'm being a little bit less graphic than they do in the movie. And he says, Ben says, I'll wipe your ass until there's no poop left. Right. The S word, of course, is used in that case. And you see at that moment that these two are going to match each other's energy. Yeah. And I think it's great. And then you get the rundown from the mother. So Mom. What is Mom's role in this film as one of the caregivers and just in general?
Yeah, Mom's role is the same role that moms play, I think, to a significant number of individuals with disabilities. I think because, like I said, the microaggressions towards people with disabilities, if you look through that ableist microaggression scale, you could just kind of count out like which of these are just like moms on steroids or even just regular momming. And again, it's that difference between the one mosquito bite and the swarm. And so I think it's very, very common in the experiences that I've heard about, that I've seen in movies, that I've seen in comedy, that I've seen in all these places where the families are really big issues in infantilizing and in making sure that this person is kept delicate and safe, when in fact that's not really what's helpful. Sure. That's not really what is wanted or needed, because I think parts of it were really unrealistic in the caregiving that was actually needed by Paul Rudd, but it's entirely possible that they were needed because of Mom. And what I mean by that is like, when, again, you're thrown into the fire, you figure it out or you burn. And in his case, it's like, tell me he doesn't have a bidet. Like we've got this one solved. There's ones that he can press with minor button use. And it's not as though people with disabilities would ever not know that. Like we figure it out. You figure it out. And so the issue is, obviously there's one of cost. It is very expensive to be disabled. So sure, there's a lot of people who have similar issues to him that like might still need care with that. But there's even travel bidets and things like that. Like we got this one. So the only thing that would really be blocking in that situation is kind of mom.
Yeah.
If that were really kind of not part of the story, which I think honestly it was just a storytelling feature more than like a reality.
Yeah.
But I think that mom does end up blocking so much of his life when she says he's never been more than an hour away, and you can see like the implicit drama on the screen is really about like she's made sure he has never been more than an hour away because she's got this fear of what could happen to him that he doesn't seem to share to the same extent.
Mm-hmm.
He does show fear, but honestly, I think that's because of the story that was told to him by her through his whole life. Like, you can't do this.
You have to wonder if his anxiety is not inherent to his mental, so his brain chemistry, but rather a product of the amount of infantilizing his mother has added to his life, because he was diagnosed at 3, right? And let's assume normal pruning happens in his brain around 5 or whatever, so he doesn't remember the early years of his diagnosis, but he does have vivid memories from 5, probably around the time that he had to get into a wheelchair, and just never being that far away from home, only going to the park once a week.
Right. And this constant story of like, something could go wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, could you imagine if that's the story that you were told all the time? And it's not as though it's untrue in the sense that I think was really shown through the scene where Paul Rudd played the trick on him, where the character Ben played the trick and said like, oh my gosh, I forgot your medications.
He had me going. I honestly, Paul Rudd played that so well. As a person with anxiety, I was like, oh, this is the conflict of the movie.
Now there we're getting into it. But I think it really takes home that point, right? Of like, if we forget something, it's not the same as forgetting face cream. Far more so for him than for me.
Yeah.
But similarly, like I have a spinal cord stimulator, and at one point, actually at the conference where I met you, I forgot the charger to my charger. And I ran out of spinal cord stimulator energy.
Oh, wow.
And it's not the same as not having face cream.
Okay.
It is not the same. It's like, okay, so now do I have what I need to manage this pain?
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I'm practiced at ACT. Let's see if that's good enough for the day. I don't know.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's different, but it's also fine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, this too shall pass. That was a painful day. And then it was the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that teaches us that is practice.
Yeah.
And he wasn't given the opportunity to practice. And certainly there's some medications that will be more or less important or, but even then, to me, like if I walk through, I don't know that particular medical diagnosis well or anything, but I imagine if it's as important that it's not a this too shall pass situation, then just go to the hospital. There's always somewhere to go. There's always a way. I kind of write this off in my head as like, there's always a memo you can write, right? Like there's some way out of it.
Yeah.
And so, go to the hospital. It's going to suck. And then it's going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, and within the prank that Ben plays on Trevor in this scene, he's like, you know what, I'll just, I'll call a 24-hour pharmacy. And Trevor's like, there are no 24-hour pharmacies around here. We're in, BF nowhere.
Right.
And that's going to be the thing. And Ben's like, of course, it'll be fine. Like you said, there is some place to get these things, and it probably, I don't want to diminish anyone's real fear about lack of resources that they need, but there's probably a way out of it. Probably.
Right. And I'm sure there's a whole range of experiences regarding that. But I do strongly believe that the story of necessity is actually pushed on individuals with disabilities more so from external sources than internal.
Okay.
Like and of course that's going to be an individual thing. Like that's not going to be universal, but you habituate. Everybody habituates to their situation. In fact, there's a great study where they compared the kind of well-being, happiness of individuals who won the lottery versus people who had been in like a horrible kind of disabling accident.
Okay.
And it's There's no difference really. Like once that you get to a point of habituation, then the worst thing is still the worst thing. If you were anxious before, you're probably anxious now.
Yeah.
Like it's just not that relevant anymore. It's just like the life that you know now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we get humans are really good at getting used to things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that might be hardwired in our cognition. It might be hardwired in our genetics that we just have to adapt. We're really good at adapting. We've, obviously colonized as an animal the whole globe from our beginnings in on one continent. We've colonized the whole globe like that. I don't mean colonized as governments and all of that, but as an animal, right? We've adapted to all sorts of different places because that's what we do. Our brain allows us to adapt. We're really amazing like that, and it's probably because we're just really good at getting used to things.
Right. And I think that there's obviously, I don't know, like sub demographics within that. Like it is very, very common, of course, for people with chronic pain to have depression.
Yeah.
I don't want to undermine that or say that like one shouldn't. Like that is a very normal experience of if you add a punisher, speaking as a behaviorist, if you add a punisher to everything you do, how many more reinforcers do you have to add to just get the math of well-being?
Right. Yeah.
But I think when we're talking about as a whole, just figuring out how to use a new body, there's evidence to say that figuring out how to use a new body becomes normal once it's normal.
Yeah, I think, and by the end of the movie, we do see massive amounts of growth in Trevor after they go on this road trip to go see the most boring oddities of the United States, ending at the giant pit somewhere in Montana or
like an
Wyoming.
hour from me. I found out
really
watching.
This is a real place?
I had the exact same experience. I was like, wait, they're saying that's in Utah. I'm in Utah. I'm going to look it up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how have I never been there?
Oh, so it's in Utah.
Trash.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so, it's like, so funny.
Yeah, just like a mine hole or something. I don't know. I'm definitely going to go in the next couple of weeks. Just be like, I've seen the hole.
I love it. Yeah. It must have been like a core. I don't know. Is it a natural formation? I couldn't tell if it was like
it's from mining or something. Well, maybe it was natural and
okay.
expanded upon or something, but it's a mining like thing.
Gotcha. Okay. That is quite intriguing. The one last thing before we get to the break, Crissa, is I wanted to ask you about the cow scene and specifically the Americans with Disability Act. And honestly, this is like the only scene where the idea of the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, is brought into the plot. There's really no other mentions elsewhere about disability access. Can you talk to us about this scene and sort of what Paul Rudd's character Ben does?
Yeah. So, in the scene, we have Trevor is so excited to see this stupid, like, giant cow, which I would be too. Like, I'm obsessed with that whole subplot of like what he wants to see. And so he goes in and with his like his relative level of excitement that he ever displays. And then they just say, no, it's on the second floor. So it's not for you. Let us give you this consolation prize of like a postcard.
Right.
And his response to that, I think, is striking because he just says, yep, okay, let's go. And that is the response that is typical, is the response that is expected. You read about different disability activists, and that's a big part of what the activism is really against, is like, we don't have to do that. We don't have to make ourselves smaller, which is really the external pressure to do so.
Right.
But instead, you have this person who's really being like an advocate for Trevor in this way that like would have been, again, this is the interesting thing about coming upon disability midstream. It would have been embarrassing as hell to me in the first few years of being disabled. It would have been like, drop it. Let's go.
Okay.
Like, do not try to tell him it's his problem, which is what, of course, Ben did. He said like, sorry, this is your problem. How are we getting him up there?
Yep.
And that is the experience, is like, let's just go.
Yeah.
Let's just go. And then to have an advocate like that who says like, nope, this is a whole person. He gets to have the whole person experience. And if you've chosen to exclude him, then what are we going to do now? Like, how are we going to not exclude him anymore? That was an active choice that you made from being thoughtless to put him on the second floor. And as an outward facing business, this is your responsibility. And there's all sorts of like little codes and laws that really like keep everybody safe. So it's not even like, I think the law has no teeth at all, is something that I've found over the years.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's still like the goal of the law is like, if it is a public facing institution, of public facing business, then I get to see it. And I can't do stairs that day and then still work later that night. So how are you going to help me see this stupid cow that I now want to see?
Yeah.
And so I think that was a really great view of being an advocate in a way that would have a variety of different responses, I'm sure, for individuals. Again, pointing to this idea, people from a group are not a monolith.
Right.
There are individuals inside of it. But what a great thing to display as an option.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And like I said, setting up that question, it's the only place in the plot in the movie, like it's a tight 90-minute movie, right? It's the only place where other characters, other than the main ones that we see throughout the movie, it's the only place in the movie where anyone has any kind of stink raised about any of it related to Trevor's disability and being in a wheelchair, because they eat at restaurants. Trevor just wheels up to the table. When Dot and Trevor go on their date to the diner across the street from the motel room, we actually don't spend any time in that diner, but we can see them, and it looks like they have a table, and Trevor has just wheeled up to the table. There's no interactions with wait staff going, oh, we need to move this chair, or are you going to need a handicap table, anything like that. It's just all of that is assumed, and then we have this one scene associated with ableism, and I think it's a really powerful scene, and I love how the I guess we'll call them ranch entrepreneurs just struggle to get his motorized wheelchair up and down the stairs. It's great. It's really fun.
And the editing on that was so good.
It was amazing.
Of struggle. Yeah.
And the relative quickness that they spend up on the second floor, right? They just stare at the cow's eyes. Some great close-ups going back and forth between the cow's eyes and the two men's eyes. And and they're like, are you done? Yep, I'm done. And then they have to do it
what
again.
are you going to do for that long with a giant cow? You're just going to be like, I will spend the day, gazing upon him. Like, it's just like, it's going to be a 5-minute visit, and he gets to do it. Yeah. And I love that.
I don't know about you, but I was thinking that this cow was alive. And I was like, second floor, why do they have an alive cow on the second floor? This doesn't make any sense. And then it was a stuffed cow.
Yeah. Yeah, I had the same. And I was still like, why did they put something that heavy on the second floor? Like, this is, I mean, I guess I don't understand taxidermy. Maybe it's light then. I don't know. But either way, it's just like, what a dumb, like, it's thoughtless in so many ways and seems really not great with feasibility.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we are going to take a quick break. After the break, we are going to talk about Ben's characterization. Why does he want to be a caregiver, a full-time caregiver to a disabled teenager, young adult, whoever they are? So stay tuned for that conversation. Are you a big fan of the Cinema Psych podcast? A connoisseur of the compelling stories and intriguing insights that we have on this show? Well, show your love in style with our premium podcast merchandise. Yeah, that's right. I've updated the podcast store from ultra comfy hoodies, perfect for cozy podcast binges, to sleek coffee mugs that add a dash of personality to your morning routine, our merchandise store has it all. I've added so many new products, and it's designed to withstand countless listening marathons. There are a lot of episodes. I think you'll love them. But wait, there is more. Every week, there is a new promotion, turning up the volume on value. So keep an eye out for our exciting special promotions. Every other week, 15% off. In between, sometimes there's a special 25% off day. And then sometimes there's free shipping. It's the perfect way to score your Cinema Psych podcast merch for less. I'm excited to have expanded the merchandise offerings, but I'm really excited to say that new designs are coming up. And you can put these designs on all of the merchandise. So keep an eye out for new arrivals in the design section. So don't just listen, wear it, flaunt it, live it. Visit our merchandise store at cinemapsychpod.swanpsych.com/store to shop your love for the Cinema Psych podcast today. Remember, every purchase goes directly to supporting this show. And of course, thanks for listening to this show. I love doing it. Now let's get back into it. And we are back with Dr. Crissa Draper talking the 2016 film The Fundamentals of Caring with Paul Rudd. So in this segment, we are going to be talking about Paul Rudd's character, Ben, a little bit more. We mentioned him in the last segment, of course, we did. We have to. He's the caregiver to Trevor, the disabled person in the movie. But in this one, he really gives us a window into the characterizations of all of the people in the movie. Not only himself, but Trevor as well, Dot, and then we meet Peaches along the way. So in this segment, we're broadly going to talk about trauma because that is the main characterization for Paul Rudd's Ben. But I first want to ask Crissa, I want to ask you a question. This is a kind of a rhetorical question, so if you need to punt it, go for it. But I was curious. So at the beginning of the movie, we don't know Ben very well. We meet him at as he's taking this caregiving course, and he's being hounded by a person who we later see is his wife, and she is requesting for him to sign divorce papers. But he's taking this caregiving course, and he says when he meets Jennifer Eel's mother of Trevor's character that he took a 6-week course. My question for you, Crissa, is, and I put this in our notes document, is 6 weeks a long enough course for adequate training in full-time caregiving?
That's a great question. And I think that caregiving means so many different things.
I know, it does.
And I think that one of the themes to me about the care that this character needed was like, there's really very little that needed to be trained instead of just chatting with Trevor, asking Trevor what he needs.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly, he needs to understand how to do a hold appropriately, that it's not going to drop him. He needs to understand how to, like, what health behaviors matter in different contexts. But really it comes down to, at one point, Elsa, the mom, tells Ben, do you know this disease? If not, look it up.
Yeah.
And then, at the end of the movie, we cut back to he's spouting out statistics about it. And I'm like, so
funny.
That's the training that he needed.
Yeah.
Right. He needed like a little bit from Wikipedia, a lot from Trevor, and then to know how to hold him up.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think that it's just so variable. Like, in my professional life, I used to work with caregivers of people with dementia. And I would say that a 6-week training course is really not good enough for caregiving for somebody with dementia.
Too short? Yeah. Okay.
Too short, because then you've got all the issues that we have with Ben, but then we also have like how do you calm somebody when
Yeah.
rationality is not going to work?
Yeah.
Like all of these emotional things and safety feeling things that come up there. But when somebody's just like, I think it's almost infantilizing in some way, like a denial of personhood in some way for somebody else to do the training other than how do you pick someone up safely?
Yeah.
And I'm overstating that. I don't think it's actually infantilizing, but I think it's like an extension of that. It's like he knows what he needs. And so if we just listen to Trevor, then we're good.
I agree. I agree with that. I based my question on the role that my mother and stepfather, and in addition to my younger sister, played in an increasingly aging my grandmother. So my mother's mother. So she lived with my family, not with me. This is I'm adult, already had a family. She's in her she's in her 90s. She passed peacefully in 2019. And so, up until that time, increasingly having small micro strokes, right?
Yeah.
Increasing in cognitive decline and dementia, and not being able to hold herself up to go to the bathroom and all of those things. And I was curious if they knew about a 6-week course to assist them with this, would that have been adequate? Or would that have been better than just like trying to muddle through it on their own?
Right.
Or they did eventually end up having to hire caregivers to come to the home because they needed to work and do all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
In much the same role as Ben plays in this movie. And how much training did those people get? I obviously never asked those people. It never occurred to me to ask those nurses and in-home caregivers, but it is a massively growing industry. And we are going to need way more than we have in the next decade and beyond, because not only are baby boomers getting older and going to need that care, but there are just more people. And so statistically, you are going to have people like Trevor. I forgot what the statistic was at the end of the movie. Do you recall how many people end up with Duchenne muscular dystrophy?
No, I don't remember.
It was like 1 in 1,500 or something like that, maybe?
I think it was that sounds kind of right. Yeah. I just loved like that he had it, but I don't remember.
So I may be wrong about that statistic, everyone. But I mean, just statistically speaking, we've got 8 billion people in the world.
Right.
1 in 1,500, if that's the statistic, that's a lot of people, right? Who are also going to need
one of the
that.
rare ones.
And that's a rare one, right? So not only do we have baby boomers getting older, we have increased cases of dementia and dementia-related disorders like Alzheimer's. We have, these kinds of muscular and neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's and muscular dystrophy, ALS, all of these things. We are going to need way more care. And this thinking, I know I didn't write a whole lot of this, and I'm just like kind of like coming up with ideas right now, but like we are going to need more. And is 6 weeks for a certification enough?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I used to work at this place called the Nevada Caregiver Support Center in grad school. And we didn't offer any sort of course for caregiving in the way that Trevor had, or that Ben had, excuse me. But what we did do was we offered the part that he didn't have. And those programs are around and essential because it's the part of like, it's so common for people to get terrified when they don't have a memory left. And what do you do with that? Right.
Yeah.
So those kinds of like mental health add-ons are just not part of what the nursing assistants were doing. Like the nursing assistants would do the toilet training, or not toilet training, the toileting.
Yeah.
They would do a bunch of like the care that we saw Ben doing. But that is certainly, I mean, it's just so different what kind of care you need based on what kind of issue you have.
Yeah.
So, I think that Trevor needed hands.
Yeah.
Less often he needed feet. And as long as there were hands and feet around, he was like, he had what he needed.
At least he
Whereas
had
I
his
think-
mental faculties there.
Yeah, because he could inform the rest.
Right.
And I think that's not true to the much larger caregiver burden.
Right. And so it takes me back to like the way that it's presented in the beginning of the movie, where you're given this acronym Aloha. And help me out with it's ask questions, listen. What was O?
Help. The next O was I don't remember the O. I have it written down somewhere.
And then H was, help, and then the A at the end of Aloha was ask again.
Ask again.
Yeah. And it strikes me as you're saying, like, this is only a small fraction of the caregiving that needs to occur among, as you say, non-monolithic disabled populations, because disability comes in many shapes and sizes. And I was like, okay, so he goes through this 6-week course, and the only thing we see from this course is the Aloha acronym. And of course, the Aloha acronym is the only thing shown because that is a theme throughout the movie. But we don't see anything else. And then we cut to Ben saying, oh no, Trevor's going to be my first client. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Do you know what you're getting yourself into? Because I'm sure he was placed there by the agency that is actually paying him the $9 an hour. Sidebar on the $9 an hour. This was in 2016. $9 an hour was not in 2016. Right. Fast forward 8 years later, and I was watching, I was like, $9 an hour. Oh my God. And you brought up nursing assistants, CNAs, certified nursing assistants, get paid garbage for the work that they have to do. And okay, sure, it's hard work. It's a certification, and it's not the same as, a 4-year bachelor's degree or even a 2-year RN degree. But honestly, nursing assistants do some of the hardest job because they are at the bottom of the hierarchy, right? And so they do some of the hardest jobs, and they get paid dirt.
Yeah, it's really awful.
And one of the things that I did learn about the organizations that came and assisted my grandmother while my parents were working when she lived with them was that they too were getting paid dirt, right? If not minimum wage, just above minimum wage.
Right.
And in Wisconsin, minimum wage isn't that great.
Yeah, it's really I feel like the more you look under the hood of any kind of whole field of things, you're just like, oh, this is all trash. Burn it down, start over.
Yeah.
And I think that like the CNAs of the medical field, I mean, there's plenty to burn down in the medical field, but certainly CNAs are part of it. It is the disproportionate amount of work done by people at the bottom who are not making living wages. They're not getting what they're worth is just absolutely awful.
Yeah. My younger sister, she's 11 years younger than me, and her first foray into life post high school was her goal is to her current goal is to be a teacher, but work in special ed because one of her best friends growing up has Down syndrome, and so she wanted to work with intellectual and Down syndrome disabled folks. And so her first foray into life post high school was CNA. And she worked at a home for folks with Down syndrome and other intellectual disabilities. I think most of them, if not all, had actual diagnosed Down syndrome and not any other kind of LD or ID. And she said it was some of the hardest work she'd ever done. And she's a very small girl. She's very petite. Yeah. And just the scenes that we see in the movie of Paul Rudd struggling to hold, although he does a very good cradle hold of Trevor. just struggling to get him up to go to the bathroom. Although some of the struggles I think in the movie are supposed to be meant to be hilarious, right? Because the standing while peeing was one of Trevor's dreams if he didn't have muscular dystrophy, which I thought was hilarious. Because
I did too. That was so great.
I'm here to say it's not that all that it's cracked up to be honest with you. But that's easy to say. That's right. That's easy to say from where I'm sitting. Right.
I'll take it. Yeah. No, but I think that was cool too. Just as a quick sidebar, like I think that was so telling that it was such a mundane.
Yes, that's true.
Thing.
That's very true.
And I loved that about it. It was just like, I just want to be able to do this little thing.
Yeah.
I don't need to go climb a mountain.
Exactly.
I just want to pee. Peeing sounds great. Yeah.
And they get it done at the end of the movie. But like it just seeing her and hearing all of her struggles with this, like she abandoned nursing assistants very quickly. Like after her, like I don't think she ever got it renewed. Like her certification was valid for X amount of months or whatever, 24 months or whatever it is. And she was like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Absolutely not. And so she's finishing up her teaching degree and going to get credentialed in special education. So she ultimately got to where she wanted to be, working with individuals with intellectual or learning disabilities, but in we'll say a slightly more structured environment and less.
Right.
Obviously, teachers are still struggling in this country. But,
right. There's another hood to not look under. But
right. Exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's entirely true, that it's just it's so much work and it's such difficult work. The turnover rate was so high when I was working in that setting.
Yeah.
That it's not only that you have different people all the time, but it's always kind of new. And that's an interesting problem, because one of the things that I think is true about caregiving as a general rule is like the reason why it's hard is because of the lack of practice.
Yeah.
So people's parents get old once, and then it's going to be like the one or two people in your family that are going to have this problem. They're not going to have the same problem as each other. And you have to learn everything from scratch.
Yeah.
Right then about this particular one.
Yeah.
Because it's not generalizable. And then as soon as as soon as you learn it, it's over.
Yeah, I agree.
And everybody has to become this micro expert overnight, or else they're suffering. So surprise, there's a lot of suffering, like within these family units and within this like kind of struggle to gain competence. And so there's this need for these actual experts, not the short-term experts, but like I've done this 30 times and we can't keep them because they're not treated well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what's the deal with the deep pit or whatever?
Well, in the 70s, some scientist dudes made a little tiny hole 6 miles deep straight down, trying to get to the center of the Earth. Named it the world's deepest pit. I think I just like the name.
So your dream is to see a big hole in the ground?
I've always been an overachiever. I'm also going to see my father.
Did your dad fuck up too?
I wouldn't know. He left when I was 3, when I was diagnosed.
That's really bullshit on a stick. Why are you seeing him?
His idea. Thinks I should forgive him.
I wouldn't forgive him.
So Ben takes this course and he becomes the caregiver to Trevor. And let's talk a little bit about Ben's characterization. So we learn throughout the movie in very small bits, and so spoiler alerts, Ben takes the caregiving course, is being divorced by his wife, is being hounded by a process server to sign those divorce papers because his actions or potential inactions, we do see it's hard to know whether or not we should treat Ben's memory as reliable, but unfortunately, Ben's young son is hit by their family van picking up loose fruit. God, loose fruit. Put him in bags, y'all. Onto the driveway, and he gets run over by the van that was not parked properly. Perhaps the parking brake was no longer good. We don't honestly know. We don't actually see the son get hit by the car, but we do know that the son is dead in the present time during the setting of the film. And so Paul Rudd plays a dad who is grieving, suffering a massive trauma, likely thinks that it is his fault. Whether it is or not, that's beside the point. He thinks it's his fault, and that's good enough, right? And so he is grieving. And that's the impetus for him going to this caregiving course. But what we see in the movie is that he processes his grief through fathering, right? He fathers Trevor in a way that Trevor's father didn't, left at 3.
Yeah.
He ends up being a father briefly to Dot, played by Selena Gomez, who is hitchhiking from Olympia, Washington to Denver, Colorado. And then ultimately acts as a surrogate father of Peaches, who has to emergency deliver a baby at the bottom of the giant pit. And so Ben's characterization is somebody in need of purpose. And he explains that purpose, I think, in a very important quote to Peaches while Trevor and Dot are at dinner.
What's it like being a parent?
Every corny thing you've ever heard about having a kid is completely and utterly true. It's the only reason we're here.
He is a grieving father. His purpose,
Right.
according to him, is no longer active.
Absolutely. That was such a heartbreaking.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the ways, Crissa, that you saw him dealing with his grief in this movie and some of the actions that he takes in an effort to heal himself?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there was this, steady theme of what fatherhood meant in a variety of ways, which you kind of explained in other words. But it's that was, you take Paul Rudd's sentence, like that's the only thing. And really you could apply that to the movie. It's the only thing. The movie is just fatherhood. It is just being there for logistically, emotionally, whether it's to deliver a baby or hold you up while peeing. It's being there for people in this way that is just open arms.
Yeah.
And I really like that about the movie. I think it's delightful, especially from, the context of the debunking the 5 stages of grief, right? It's like that's such a trash idea. And a harmful one, in fact. There's, I was part of a study that we showed that it's really harmful because it denies social support.
Yeah.
If you grieve wrong.
Right.
And so to show another representation of this is what grief looks like too. It looks like pulling in the thing that's missing from everywhere in this way that's, your chosen family, and that love can be so many things. And I think that's just this really powerful and delightful part that really makes the movie great. Instead of just a movie that has a lot of things that teach you. It's no, this is where that feeling is. This is where that story is. And I think it's a really great way to tell that story.
I agree. And I was not expecting the whole Peaches thing or her delivering the baby, but obviously in hindsight, it makes perfect sense. But as they're going on the highway and they see Peaches and her car broke down, it's like she's visibly pregnant.
Yeah.
And she makes the goofy, I'm pregnant, while he's staring at her oh yeah, obviously. And so I think while he is, so the movie is Fundamentals of Caring and not Caregiving, of course, because caring goes beyond actually providing support or providing help in physical ways or even emotional ways, to be honest with you, because caring can be this abstract kind of thing. Sending like a GIF or a meme or a reel or a TikTok or whatever to your. I was thinking about you. Here's something I'm showing that I care, right? That I care about you and that I think about you and all of that stuff. He just sees a pregnant woman in need, and he feels like that is part of his MO now, right? As you said, it's like the whole movie is the act of fatherhood, right? And so he sees a woman who is staring cluelessly at a car overheated, right? Pauses, pulls over, sees if she needs any help. We don't really know if Ben knows anything about cars. We have no idea. And he pulls over because who else is going to pull over?
If not me, then who kind of sentimentality.
Yeah.
But I think also with that is there's this, kind of poignant idea that the person who needs the most care in the movie is not Trevor.
Right.
It's Peaches. So all of the training that he did for becoming a caregiver, all of the idea of like, oh, this poor little hero in the chair, he was not the one in need of anything other than help with hands, help with toileting, right? It was Peaches needed help. She needed care. And it's this like great equalizing scene to me where it's everybody needs help.
Yeah.
And what that looks like is different. And having a caregiver, having a father figure, having somebody who cares in the way that a father does in this like kind of unlimited way that's the fundamental of caring, right? It's like that's the thing is it's for everyone and everyone will need it. It's not different for somebody just because they're in a wheelchair.
And then you see that very similar parallels to Peaches with Dot, who's not pregnant, but doesn't have a mother anymore. Her mother is dead, and she's trying to get to the last place that her mother said to go, right? To see your dreams fulfilled and that kind of stuff, Denver. Because her dad is a bit of a mess, and she says this at the end. He's a big mess, but he's my mess. And I think Ben sees that. Ben sees her hitchhiking as like this is potentially a bad situation. I know I'm a caring person. I got a 6-week certificate to show. And I want to help. And then he eventually like morphs into this father figure for her too. And even has a conversation with her real father. And it's just like, what are you doing, man? What's going on? Like, how can we make this better? And I think that was really powerful too, because then it puts the fathering of Trevor into the fullest focus, right? So we have these two side characters that needed fathers, and then we have this main character who is so disillusioned by the idea of having a father because his father pieced out at 3 to show him what fatherhood actually looks like in the form of a friend, of course, right? I'm not actually suggesting that Ben is like, I want to be your father, Trevor. They have this row in the parking lot of his actual father, of Trevor's actual father's dealership. Like, I'm not here to be your son. I'm not here to replace your son. And Ben's like, I never wanted you to be a replacement for my son. But the subtext of them arguing at each other is like, oh, actually, we needed the exact thing that we're saying we didn't need.
Right. We both needed this so desperately from this big hole in our lives. And it's like, I love that it gets to the idea of how implicit our needs can be, where it's obvious to everybody but that character that is exactly what they need. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
You're the kid with the cool sneakers.
Yeah.
So what's wrong with you?
I have Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
shit. That sounds bad. Can they fix it?
No, not yet.
That fucking blows.
Yeah.
Does it hurt?
No. I mean, kind of.
Does it affect your brains?
No.
Does your penis work?
You want a menu? Can we grab a menu? What would you like? You want a sandwich? You want some eggs, maybe? The waffles are really good, right, Trev?
Yeah.
Yeah, the waffles are good, or yeah, your penis works.
The waffles suck.
I'm Dot.
Trev.
Two perverts got room for one more?
So I want to end our chat today, Crissa, with asking you what your favorite joke, and I specifically want to ask inappropriate joke you thought was the funniest, and then I'll tell you mine.
Yeah. I mean, I think I really liked the joke where Trevor was trying to flip off Ben and his fingers were not cooperating well enough. And then, Ben just kind of laughed at it, scoffed it off, like, you can't flip me off. Don't try to do that again. And I love that for so many reasons. And I'll just kind of end on this idea that, like, that is inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Make fun of us. You know what I mean? Like, there's several comedians too that talk about that it's like, you are leaving people out for safety that's not for them, it's for you.
Yeah.
And I think that Ben's ability to make fun of Trevor really was one of the things that showed that they were comfortable with each other. And I don't think he's as much of an outsider as people expect that to be. I think that's part of inclusion, is treating people with disabilities just like you treat people in all the other ways. So that was my favorite. What was yours?
So my favorite ends the movie. It's the epilogue narration of what happens after the road trip. And so Ben says to Trevor that he was a writer and ended up retiring, and the retirement was because he lost his son. But he looks like he's gonna pick up some writing again, and he starts writing a little blurb about his time as caretaker to Trevor. And so he says he quits being Trevor's caretaker so he can be Trevor's friend. And I think that's a really important point. It is talked about in the movie at several points where Elsa, the mother, says, you have to maintain a specific kind of relationship with your charge, right? With your care charge. And not get too emotionally attached. So he doesn't do that. He becomes Trevor's friend. So, of course, Trevor gets a new caregiver. And so the joke goes that he's writing it. This is Paul Rudd's narration, voiceover, and he says, Trevor went peacefully, was found the next day, lying peacefully on the floor, indicating that Trevor had died. And you're like, oh, he died.
Right. Well, and I think importantly that the caregiver knew how special he was.
Yeah, knew how special he was. Yeah. And then there's a brief pause, and Paul Rudd says, of course, Trevor was faking. And the caregiver quit the next day.
Yeah.
It's so good. So good.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to the end of our conversation with the idea that it's okay to laugh.
Absolutely.
It's okay.
It's important to laugh.
It's important to laugh at all things.
Yes. Absolutely. Fantastic.
So I want to thank Dr. Crissa Draper for joining me to discuss fundamentals of caring. And so before we say goodbye, Crissa, is there anything that you would like to plug where folks can find more about your work, what you do at Utah State?
I don't have anything in particular to plug, but I do have some information about me at Utah State University and the distance undergraduate lab that I run and some things like that. So just, I guess, the directory. Nothing too interesting.
I will go ahead and direct that. Yeah. I will go ahead and post that in the show notes so people can just click on that link and find you right away. So I want to thank you again for joining me, Crissa. This is fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. That was a fun conversation. I sure appreciate it.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, thanks for listening.